It's the 16th of March, 1986, inside Tihar prison in Delhi. Charles Sobhraj is throwing a party. Grapes, sweets, and cake pass around to the guards. What they don't know is that the food is laced with sedatives. One by one, they fall asleep. Sobhraj walks to the gate and steps out. This is the hunt for the Serpent. To understand why a convicted man would walk out of a maximum security prison in broad view, you have to go back almost 20 years and across half a continent. And you have to accept, from the start, how little of this story is settled. Charles Sobhraj is one of the most written about criminals of the 20th century. He is also one of the least convicted. Most of what follows is reconstructed from court records in India and Nepal, from a Dutch diplomat's private files, from the reporting of journalists who tracked him for decades, and from Interpol. Where a claim is only alleged, we will say so. Sobhraj was born on the 6th of April 1944 in Saigon, then part of French Indochina. His mother was Vietnamese. His father was an Indian businessman who left. He grew up between countries and passports, a French citizen who belonged nowhere in particular. As a young man, he drifted through petty crime in Paris. He served time. He learned two things that would define the rest of his life. He learned that people trusted a well-dressed man who spoke their language, and he learned that a locked door was rarely as locked as it looked. By the early 1970s, he had found his hunting ground. It was the hippie trail. Tens of thousands of young Westerners were traveling overland from Europe to Asia, chasing something cheaper and freer than the lives they'd left. The route ran through Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and Nepal, and on to Thailand. The travelers were young. They carried cash, they carried passports, and they moved constantly, telling no one exactly where they were going next. A person could vanish on that road and not be missed for weeks. Sobhraj understood this better than anyone. There was a rehearsal for what came later. In the early 1970s, in Kabul, Sobhraj and a companion were robbing tourists on the trail when they were arrested. He escaped by feigning illness and drugging the guard who watched over him in the hospital. The same trick, sedatives and a distraction. It would not be the last time. He was building a method, and the method was already working. He worked with accomplices. A French-Canadian woman named Marie-André Leclerc, who followed him with a devotion that would eventually be tested in a courtroom. A young Indian man named Ajay Chowdhury, who became his second in command. Together they moved through Bangkok, Delhi, and Kathmandu, posing as gem dealers, and behind them they left bodies. Chowdhury would not survive the partnership. After a job in Malaysia in the mid-1970s, he was seen handing gems to Sobhraj, and then he was never seen again. His body has never been found. What happened to him is not something a court ever ruled on, but he vanished the way Sobhraj's victims vanished. The exact number of those victims will never be known. Sobhraj is believed to have killed at least 12 people. Some accounts put the figure closer to 20. One estimate goes as high as 31. Thai authorities alone linked him to 14 deaths. He once confessed to 10 murders, then withdrew the confession. Keep one number in mind as we go. Across his entire life, in every country that tried him, Charles Sobhraj was convicted of exactly 3 murders. Everything else is suspicion. So how did one man kill across 6 countries and stay free for so long? The answer is a method, repeated with patience. It began with friendship. Sobhraj was charming, fluent, and useful. He would present himself as a gem dealer. He would approach travelers who were sick, or robbed, or in trouble with the local police, and he would help them. What they did not know was that Sobhraj had often arranged the trouble himself. He would drug a traveler's food to make them ill, then appear with medicine and a place to stay. Gratitude did the rest. The victim moved in. The victim trusted him. Sometimes the victim stayed for weeks, running small errands, unaware that they were living with the man who would kill them. Then the doses changed. Sobhraj poisoned his victims with sedatives and, in some accounts, with heroin, in quantities that looked like accidental overdoses. A traveler who died far from home, with no fixed address and no one expecting a call, was easy to explain away. Dysentery, bad drugs, misadventure. The bodies were rarely examined closely. And when they were, the paperwork rarely reached the country the traveler had come from. Each death was a local mystery, filed and forgotten, disconnected from the one before it and the one after. One of the first known victims was an American woman from Seattle, named Teresa Knowlton. In 1975, her body was found in a tidal pool near Pattaya, Thailand. She had been drugged and drowned. She was wearing a bikini. Over the months that followed, more travelers turned up dead in the same region. A man named Vitaly Hakim found burned by a road. A young Dutch couple, Henk Bintanja and Cornelia Hemker, killed in December 1975, strangled and their bodies set on fire. Around the same time, in Nepal, two more travelers were murdered within a day of each other. Connie Jo Bronzich, an American, and Laurent Cartier, a Canadian. Remember those last two names. They matter more than any others in this story because they are the two that would eventually catch him. There is a pattern worth pausing on. The dead were almost all the same kind of person. Young, foreign, traveling alone or in pairs. Off the map of anyone who would come looking quickly. Sobhraj did not hunt at random. He hunted the specific blind spot in the world, where a Western life could end, and no institution would notice for months. He chose people whose absence was invisible. The victims were found wearing swimwear often enough that the press gave Sobhraj a name. The Bikini Killer. Later, another name stuck, one that described not his crimes, but his gift for slipping away. The Serpent. And here is the detail that made it all possible. The passports. Sobhraj did not just rob his victims of cash, he took their passports. A Western passport in the 1970s was a document with a photograph glued in and a border officer who rarely looked twice. Sobhraj would peel out the photo, insert his own, and become the dead man. He used stolen passports to cross borders, to check into hotels, to book flights out of a city before the body he had left behind was ever identified. A traveler reported missing in Bangkok might still be traveling in Kathmandu, according to the paper trail, because Sobhraj was carrying his name. It is a small thing, a booklet of paper. It was the entire engine of his freedom. Without it, the Serpent could not have crossed a single border twice. For a long time, nobody connected the deaths. They were scattered across different countries, different police forces, different languages. No single officer had all the files. There was no reason for a detective in Bangkok to know about a body in Kathmandu. That was the flaw in the world that Sobhraj lived inside. And then one man began to close it. His name was Herman Knippenberg, a junior diplomat at the Dutch embassy in Bangkok. In early 1976, he received a letter. A relative was searching for two missing Dutch backpackers, Henk Bintanja and Cornelia Hemker. Knippenberg was not a policeman. This was not his job. But he started asking questions, and the questions would not let him go. He would later say that the case was like having malaria, something he could not shake. On the 3rd of March, 1976, he went to a Bangkok mortuary and saw what had been done to the travelers he was looking for. He never forgot it. Knippenberg pulled a thread, and it led to an apartment building in Bangkok and to a gem dealer who lived there. When the landlord prepared to rent out that apartment, Knippenberg moved fast. He assembled a small team and got inside. What he found was not subtle. Around 5 kilograms of medicines, industrial-sized containers of liquid drugs, passports, and personal belongings that had been carried by people who were now dead, including a coat and a handbag belonging to the Dutch woman he had been searching for. A private citizen with no police powers had assembled the evidence that a killer's whole trade was run out of that room. In May 1976, the story broke in the press. A Bangkok newspaper ran it on the front page under the title, Web of Death. For the first time, the scattered deaths had a shape and a suspect. But knowing who he was and holding him were two different things. And the method worked until, one day, it didn't. In July 1976, in New Delhi, Sobhraj tried to drug a group of French postgraduate students. He gave them what he told them was medication, but he misjudged the dose, and he misjudged the timing. The students collapsed together, in the same place, at the same time. Some of them realized what was happening before it was too late. They overpowered him and held him for the police. After years of moving faster than the news of his own crimes, Sobhraj was finally arrested, not for murder, but for a poisoning that failed. In India, he was tried and convicted. The charges included the killing of a French traveler named Jean-Luc Solomon, who died during a robbery, along with drugging, theft, and passport fraud. He was sentenced to around 12 years. His accomplice Marie-André Leclerc was convicted too, though she was later released and returned to Canada, where she died of cancer in 1984, still insisting on her innocence. Sobhraj went into Tihar prison in Delhi, and for a man who had spent his life avoiding cages, he seemed strangely comfortable in one. He bribed guards, he gave interviews, he lived by the accounts of people who worked there better than most free men in the city outside. Which brings us back to the party. On the 16th of March, 1986, 10 years into his sentence, Sobhraj drugged his guards with sedative-laced sweets and walked out of Tihar. Some accounts call it a birthday celebration. though his birthday was in April, so we will simply call it a party. The escape made headlines around the world. A serial poisoner had poisoned his way out of a maximum security prison. The hunt was on. It did not last long. 3 weeks later, on the 6th of April 1986, an inspector from the Bombay police named Madhukar Zende spotted Sobhraj at a restaurant called Okokuero in Goa. Zende had hunted him before. He walked up to the table, said his name, and Sobhraj did not run. He was arrested without a struggle, in a restaurant, in a tourist town, 3 weeks after the most sensational jailbreak in Indian history. A man who had evaded 6 countries for a decade had been sitting in public, eating. Sobhraj was returned to prison, and 10 years were added to his sentence. And this is the part that turns the whole story on its head. Because there is strong reason to believe Sobhraj wanted to be caught. Here is the arithmetic. Sobhraj's Indian sentence was going to end in the late 1980s. When it ended, he faced extradition to Thailand, where he was wanted for murder, and where he faced almost certain execution. But there was a clock running in Thailand. The statute of limitations on those charges would expire after 20 years. If Sobhraj could simply stay in India long enough, the Thai case against him would die on its own. His problem was that his Indian sentence was too short. It would release him into the arms of a Thai executioner. So he broke out of prison in the most visible way imaginable, got himself recaptured, and collected an extra 10 years, exactly as a former Tihar official later suggested he intended. He was not escaping the cage, he was using it. He turned a maximum security prison into the safest hiding place he could find, and he ran out the Thai clock from inside it. When the 20 years expired, the execution that waited for him in Bangkok expired too. It was, in its own cold way, a perfect plan. He committed a crime in order to serve more time, so that a worse punishment could not reach him. In February 1997, after around 21 years inside, India released him. There was no country left to extradite him to. The Thai window had closed. The witnesses had scattered. The evidence had aged. So the man believed to have killed at least a dozen people boarded a plane, a free man, and flew home to France. For 6 years, he lived openly in Paris. He gave paid interviews, he charged for photographs, he signed a deal for the rights to his story. He hired bodyguards and a publicist. He was, by his own design, a celebrity. He could not be tried again for what France could not prove. He had, it seemed, won. The Serpent had beaten every country that ever tried to hold him, and now he was selling the tale of how he did it. That should have been the end. A killer grows old in comfort, untouchable, protected by borders and the passage of time. The families of the dead had no verdict, and it looked like they never would. The trail, quite literally, had gone cold. The hippie trail itself had faded, the countries had changed, and the young travelers of the 1970s were middle-aged now, if they had lived at all. Whatever justice was still owed seemed to have been outrun. And then, in 2003, Charles Sobhraj did the one thing no one could explain. He went back. He flew to Nepal. He said he was there to start a mineral water business. But Nepal was the one country where the case against him had never closed. 2 travelers had died there in 1975, Connie Jo Bronzich and Laurent Carrière. Those files were still open. On the 1st of September, 2003, a journalist recognized him inside a casino in Kathmandu. He was walking around in public, in the one capital city on earth where he was still wanted. The reporter alerted the authorities. Sobhraj was arrested. Why a man who had escaped justice on 3 continents would voluntarily walk into the one jurisdiction still hunting him is a question that has never been fully answered. Some say arrogance. Some say he no longer believed anyone could touch him. He was wrong. On the 20th of August 2004, a Nepalese court convicted Charles Sobhraj of the 1975 murder of Connie Jo Bronzich. He was sentenced to life. He appealed. He argued, as he always argued, that the evidence was thin and the years too long. The courts were not moved. 10 years later, on the 18th of September 2014, a second Nepalese court convicted him of the murder of Laurent Carrière and added 20 years more. For the first time in his life, the Serpent was held by a system that would not let go. For a while. On the 23rd of December 2022, the Supreme Court of Nepal ordered his release. He was old now, nearly 80, and his health was failing, and he had served around 19 years. He was deported to France and barred from returning to Nepal for at least a decade. The man who had turned prisons into hiding places had, one last time, walked out of one. This time no guards were drugged. This time the door was simply opened for him. Think about what that road allowed. A patchwork of borders that did not talk to each other. Passports checked by tired officers who trusted a photograph. Travelers who told no one where they were going. Police forces that filed each death alone, never seeing the pattern that ran between them. For nearly half a century, that gap in the world was wide enough for one man to slip through, again and again, killing as he went. He was caught, in the end, not by a system, but by individuals. A diplomat who could not sleep, an inspector in a restaurant, a reporter who looked up in a casino. The machinery of justice never quite closed around him. People did, one at a time, for a while. He was convicted of 3 murders. He is